Hello and welcome to episode 179 of the Notcast. Today is Sunday, 30th of January 2022. Every one of these I talk about a record or a band or a film. I am still reserving the right to talk about books, but I haven't talked about very many because I don't read as many books as I used to. But today, and you won't be able to guess this by looking at the t-shirt. Most times when I do this, I'm wearing a thematically appropriate t-shirt that'll make you think, oh, he's going to talk about that band during that year because he's got the t-shirt from that band in that year. Well, I haven't got any pop-related merchandise relating to this one. Today I'm going to be talking about David Bowie and his 1975 film, The Man Who Fell to Earth, and the 1976 album, Station to Station. Very important period in his career. And also, by the way, one that I think has aged fantastically well. Some of the Bowie albums, Tin Machine 2, Tonight, have aged like milk. This period absolutely, definitely, definitively has not done so. It's as relevant now as it was then, and it was quite relevant then, let's put it that way. So we start off with 1975, and in the summer of 1975, David Bowie went to Albuquerque in New Mexico to film The Man Who Fell to Earth. With a budget of $1.5 million, the film made $81,800 in America. Just about made its production costs back if you take into account the international costs and international box office for this. It was his first starring role in a feature film, especially after he'd become famous. And I think it's fair to say, actually, and I've not really talked about this, David Bowie was a fantastic actor. In a way that I don't think was ever really appreciated when he was alive, because his musical activity kind of overshadowed everything else that he did. But I think he's a really good, strong actor. And at some point I might talk about my favourite films of his, but more likely I'll probably bring out the individual films as we talk through individual episodes. So, for example, I think some of the films he's been in, he was easily the best thing in it. If you've seen Into the Night, I think it's Joe Dante, it could be John Landis movie, where he plays a British assassin. He's phenomenal in that. He's only in it for 4 minutes, but he's the guy that you remember out of the whole film. His opening line to Jeff Goldblum is, "You're very good, you know. You're really very good." And he's describing himself as fantastic role. And I probably should wait to talk about that when I talk about 1984 and the album Tonight. That will not be a pretty episode. That is not a great film. So, The Man Who Fell to Earth was this is the 2016 remastered version of the DVD. There was a DVD that came out in the late 90s, early noughties. It's pretty rubbish, to be honest. Film was always on television. It wasn't really very well looked after or very well regarded by the people that kind of looked after it. And there's a whole world of conversation around lost movies, lost cuts of movies, poorly restored movies, television versions of movies that have extra footage in them. And then you can kind of see the films that they were trying to make that were thwarted by studio intervention. And The Man Who Fell to Earth, I think, has been reappraised following Bowie's death and given the cult status that I think it always had, actually. It's one of the films that ties in with, there was quite a lot of auteur movies that were made in the 70s by British directors that sometimes weren't quite sure what message that they were sending, what story they wanted to tell, but we're going to make the movies anyway. And I'm thinking about films like Zardoz, films like all those films like The Devils and stuff, made by that guy. I've forgotten his name. Oh man, that's going to be embarrassing. I'm going to have to do, you're that guy from that thing, and everyone's like, yes, I'm the guy. Eat my shorts. I didn't do it. I'm the I didn't do it kid. That kind of thing. But no, The Man Who Fell to Earth is a cult movie that has aged phenomenally well, and I think it works really well, actually, as a kind of if you take the theory that all art is autobiography, The Man Who Fell to Earth can almost be seen as a form of autobiography. There's a reason why Bowie was attracted to it. It's the story of an alien from another planet who's humanoid, who lands on Earth and adopts the form of a human as he integrates into human society, and the experiences that he has living and operating inside a world that is alien and not necessarily particularly friendly to him. And if you've been certainly that I felt when I was younger, is I felt that I was, trapped in a world not of my own making, that I couldn't really comprehend or understand or try and navigate my way through, and I was trying to integrate myself into a society that had a whole bunch of arcane rules that I didn't fully understand, that nobody had taught me what those rules were, and you only learned what they were by getting something wrong. And The Man Who Fell to Earth is I think, a pivotal piece of work in Bowie's career. It was his first major starring role, his first post-fame headline film. It's a role that he obviously felt an affinity to, because he returned to it in 2015 for the Lazarus musical, which is effectively, although it's not explicitly labelled as such, effectively it can be seen as a sequel to The Man Who Fell to Earth, following the lead character, TJN, Thomas Jerome Newton, in his twilight years as an old man. Really fascinating idea is to go back and revisit an earlier role and play a character, knowing that the end is near. Although obviously David Bowie didn't play on stage for Lazarus, it was the fantastic actor whose name I've forgotten, who is in 6 Feet Under, but I rate him very, very highly indeed. I should have checked that before I started doing this, but to be honest, sometimes I just sit there and I've got no prep and I just go, and this is one of those ones. So The Man Who Fell to Earth. Let's open the DVD here and see what nonsense there is that's inside this. I haven't got it on Blu-ray because I haven't. There you go. That's the answer. It's that simple. And I've got the original kind of DVD kind of booklet from the original first DVD release of it. That photograph, by the way, appears on the cover of the TVC 15 single. A whole bunch of lobby postcards with it back in cinemas from the 9th of September 2016, and also on a DVD, Blu-ray, digital download and collector's edition on October the 24th. Certainly David Bowie has been extremely busy after he died and released a huge chunk of material. But it's a great film, The Man Who Fell to Earth, really important in the Bowie canon and the Bowie body of work. And one of the other things I was going to say around that is based upon the book here by Walter Tevis. Here is an ex-library copy from Maidstone Library, of all places, from 1999. And this book was taken out a number of times before it finally just stopped being taken out. And what I will say about the book is I haven't read it. I should do. I've been using the lockdown period and the COVID pandemic to catch up on books, but I haven't got around to all of them yet. This is one of the ones that's on the list. Reading and books are sexy. Of course, we know that. We know that because they are. And you've got to remember what John Waters said, which is if you go to somebody's house and they don't have books, don't fuck them. I agree with him in that respect. So, The Man Who Fell to Earth led very, very elegantly into the recording and the release of the Station to Station album. And David Bowie wrote 5 or 6 musical pieces for the soundtrack for The Man Who Fell to Earth, with the understanding that those pieces would automatically be used in the film, but they weren't. And he kind of felt, well, there's not much point really me preparing finished tracks for a soundtrack album if they're not going to be used. One of the songs from The Man Who Fell to Earth soundtrack that was aborted was repurposed and became Subterraneans from the Low album. But there are about 5 or 6 other songs and musical pieces that he'd worked on. But as you know, Bowie was a magpie. They probably reappeared under different names or were adapted in future and became, box set bait or B-sides or something like that. Before The Man Who Fell to Earth was filmed, Bowie had written most of Golden Years. During the filming of it, he wrote the songs TVC15 and Words on a Wing, which was written during the filming. And they went into the studio with a set of musicians to begin recording the album in late 1975. The working title for the album was The Return of the Thin White Duke. And at this point, Bowie had become a tax exile. I have to take a little bit of a detour now, talking into why people became tax exiles. You may remember a song by a band called the Beatles. They were quite big ones. They had a song called Taxman, which had the line, which is one well, 19 for you and 1 for me. And that was the British rate of tax that existed in the early 70s, which is that if you earned over a certain amount of money, at least £1 million, for example, if you earned £1 million a year in Britain in 1973, you had to pay £950,000 in tax to the British government. So that's 19 for you and 1 for me, which obviously, even with inflation taken into account, £50,000 in 1973 was an awful lot of money. It's the equivalent of something like £1 million now. But if you're a Beatle, £1 million as a salary is not a huge amount of money, considering you're in the biggest band in the world. And David Bowie was facing an enormous tax debt in the late 1975 period. I think it was about $300,000. And in America, please correct me if I'm wrong, by the way, but as I understand it, historic tax debt in America in the 70s was that you had a number of years to pay your tax bill. So, for example, if you had a really bad year, you weren't penalised in that year, but you had to pay the tax in a future year. So the tax on all the activity that Bowie had undertaken in America was starting to become due in around about 1975, and he didn't have the money to do so because of the financial mismanagement of the Main Man label, and also the way in which they spent an awful lot of money on things before David saw the money. So David was paying tax on money that he never saw, that had been ferreted away in various arcade and unusual business agreements. Effectively, he didn't have the money to pay the tax bill, even though he was 5 years into a very successful career and had sold an awful number of records, awful in a good way, and was headlining arenas. So he had to move to a village near Lake Geneva and Montreux in Switzerland, where the effective tax rate there was 10%, to escape his tax debts and burden for money which he didn't have because it had been embezzled from him by the financial mismanagement of the Main Man label. And if you're at the Main Man label, it's all water under the bridge now, guys. Everyone that did it is either dead or retired, so let's not get too upset about anything like that. The percentage of tax which you paid in Montreux was 10%, but in order to do so, you had to remain resident in the country for a certain number of days per year. This applies, by the way, for every other country. So if you're in America for a certain number of days a year, or Britain for a certain number of days a year, you are a resident for tax purposes. So you can go to, Britain for a certain number. Let's say you're a tax exile in Montreux or Monte Carlo or wherever, somewhere starting with M. That's not, the Midlands. And you have to stay in there for a certain number of days to prove that you live there. Now, you can work internationally. You can be in America for a certain number of days. You can be in the UK for a certain number of days. But once you exceed a certain number of days, in terms of the number of days that you spend there, or, for example, you have a minimum number of days that you're meant to spend in a certain country, you end up being regarded as resident. So, for example, certainly when I was younger, lots of bands used to play tours between the beginning of March and the end of April, and that allowed them to do a tour every 2 years. But for tax purposes, it was a tour every 1 year, and it halved their income and it kept them in a different tax bracket. For example, another example would be if you were a certain band and you are based in the UK, but you tour internationally. You can then regard yourselves as resident in a certain country for tax purposes. But if you are, let's say you're in the UK for 183 days, that's more than half the year, and then therefore you automatically become resident for tax purposes. So you have to spend at least 6 months a year in another country or another series of countries. You could tour for 5 months, for example, and spend a month on holiday, and then you aren't actually a tax exile, or more correctly, you are a tax exile because you're not in the UK for enough days. It's all very, very complicated. If I fully understood it, I'd be a tax advisor, and I am not. But at the time, in the 70s, being a tax exile was probably regarded as being a little bit rock and roll. The Rolling Stones did it, Rod Stewart did it, David Bowie did it, the Beatles were quite tempted with doing it. And it was almost seen as being like an international James Bond style financial bit of daring do. But no, Bowie became a tax exile because he couldn't afford to pay his tax bill. He didn't have £300,000 lying around. Who does? Not that many people. And so he went to record station to station in America, in late 1975, and he pulled together a kind of like a lineup for his band, which featured Dennis Davis on drums, who played with David all the way through to the Scary Monsters album, Carlos Alomar, who played guitar with David all the way through to the Outside era, George Murray on bass, who was part of David's backing band until the Scary Monsters album, and Earl Slick played guitar as well. And Earl was part of the Bowie alumni through to the next day, almost to the very end of his career. Earl was the guitarist when I saw Bowie live at Glastonbury in the year 2000. So to me, he had a fairly solid band behind him, although obviously, much like Morrissey, it's the man's name that's on the cover of the record and not the name of the band, because there isn't a band, and so therefore what he says goes. He calls the shots. But you can really hear there's kind of like a really solid, brilliant lineup there that have been playing together for a long period of time, and they know how everybody responds and acts and feels. And you can hear this on good records. Is you can hear when a band has a solid lineup that's gelled and built together. They've got some kind of magic. It's more than the sum of the parts. And you've got this in spades on the Station to Station album. The musicianship is immaculate. It's absolutely brilliant here. And the band were recording in a fairly intensive kind of 4 days on, 4 days off process. When you're working creatively, there's a concept known as flow, and that is that you kind of like you're in the zone, and you know when you're in a flow state. Things like you don't really realize that you're hungry or that you're tired, and you work very long hours because your brain is so consumed with the concept and the process and the reality of creativity. You're not really paying attention to anything else. And I think that was kind of very much in evidence when they were recording Station to Station. And the title track, for example, is a perfect example of flow. It is something where if somebody was going to write a song and put it down on paper, write down the lyrics and put it down on wax, as the Shaman had it, you wouldn't necessarily do a 10-minute song that has 1 minute of train noises at the beginning. But somehow when they did the Station to Station album, it felt like it was the right thing to do. And with this album, I regard this as one of the very best of the David Bowie records. You can hear the influence of krautrock, soul, funk, bands like Kraftwerk. You can hear the influence of them on Station to Station in the way that there's a kind of cold, clinical sound, but at the same point, it's almost a precise clinical funk. The kind of very rigid drum patterns that you get from drum machines, but played by humans. It is really unique sound, I think, for this album. And the first kind of fruit from the period was the release of the single Golden Years. And Golden Years was released a couple of months before the album came out. 7-inch single here. Here's a copy on RCA. Backed with Can You Hear Me from the Young Americans album. A bit frustrating if you're a Bowie fan, knowing that there were songs like Who Can I Be Now that weren't released or were kind of sitting on a shelf somewhere, but you did get Golden Years, which is a fantastic Bowie track. It's one of his best, actually. I really love it. It's prescient because it sounds a little bit like what was to come after it, as well as at the same point sounding very much like what he'd done before. So it's the next logical progression after the Young Americans album. And it's got a fascinating structure where the verses and the bridges and the choruses are all different things, but they feel that you don't notice that until you really listen to the song dozens and dozens of times, and you kind of go, oh, that's not a conventional structure. Like Underworld's Born Slippy doesn't have a conventional song structure because it's all verse, no chorus. The same kind of thing is if you were to do music purely by mathematics and numbers and to think about 8 bars or 4 or whatever, Golden Years doesn't sound like that at all. It sounds like it's made by humans that are weird and silly as opposed to something that's come out of a machine. Fantastic Bowie track, by the way. Big hit, really important. And Golden Years got a remix many years later to coincide with the reissue of the Station to Station album. Here is the 12-inch, the KCRW remixes, which I think these came out in 2011, just after the 2010 version of Station to Station was released. So Station to Station, I talked a lot about it. let's get to it. Track 1, Station to Station, the longest Bowie track released until the Black Star title track, and in fact it might just nudge over it by a couple of seconds. And the Station to Station title track is absolutely gorgeous. So when you've got the Station to Station title track, it really feels like it's both influenced by and an influence on Kraftwerk. So if you think about the beginning of Station to Station, it's the sound effects of a train that are fed into a bunch of computers and phasers and pedals and effects things and sequences and all that stuff, and bended and phased and pitched, so it sounds like something otherworldly and something alien, and kind of almost feeling like a UFO that's landing. And this is a clear kind of takes it hint from Kraftwerk's Autobahn. The title track to Kraftwerk's Autobahn opens with the sound of an engine revving up before you go on a sidelong journey through the track. Station to Station opens with the sound of a train starting up, and it takes a minute before any of the music even starts, and it's a 10-minute song, which is half the size of an LP. It's glorious. It's hugely influenced by Kraftwerk, and it's also, by the way, a huge influence on Kraftwerk, because the track Trans-Europe Express by Kraftwerk, which was on the next studio album that was released after Station to Station came out, features the lyric about travelling station to station and meeting Iggy Pop and David Bowie. So yes, very obviously birds of a feather there. Now the LP, this is an original orange label RCA copy from 1976. I'm surprised this one's still existence, actually, because these records were not made to last. These were disposable pop products that were sold in their thousands, mass produced in factories. These were not designed to be artifacts to be treasured and loved nearly 50 years later. This is the 1976 RCA Records original release, printed and made in Great Britain by Garrett Print Limited. As you can see, it's even got the I think it's got the original inner sleeve, because it's got that lovely yellowing which comes with an original copy from then. Lovely thick vinyl. God, I'm turning into one of those guys, aren't I? Forgive me. I played this the other day. It's perfect. Very quiet, very well mastered. It's a lovely, lovely album, and this is just immaculate. I love Station to Station. It's one of my favourite Bowie LPs. It's in my top 5, easily in my top 5. In fact, I remember when Black Star came out, and I spoke to my brother and I said, it's his best one since Station to Station. But I've got a lot of thoughts about Black Star, and I'll get to those when I get to those. But it's it's a Black Star is the best album I think he made after Station to Station, which gives you an idea of how high I rate this record. Now, the cover there, the cover photograph, is taken from a scene in The Man Who Fell to Earth. There is a cover version, was a colour version of the Station to Station cover, which most obviously is on the RCA, on the Ryko disc version of the album released in 1990 with the bonus tracks. There's a colour version of the cover and the black and white version from the same shots, but you can see they're framed differently, and there's extra information on the Ryko disc CD. So track 2, Golden Years, we've already discussed that. Track 1, Station to Station, one of the best David Bowie tracks there are. And track 3 is Word on a Wing, which was written during the filming for The Man Who Fell to Earth, and it's probably the one song on the album that I don't love as much as any of the others. It feels a little not sincere, but it's a very straight song, and I kind of like Bowie when he's got his curves and his bends, and he comes at things from a slightly different angle, and it's not quite linear and straightforward. Word on a Wing feels a little bit like it's a letter written to an absent god. I like it, but I don't love it. You flip over to side 2, TVC15, one of the best Bowie songs, and a song by him that I think has really been underrated and underappreciated. So here we have one of the 7-inch singles for TVC15. You will recognise that photograph there on the front from the Man Who Fell to Earth DVD booklet. This comes from the Lifetime Singles series, when all of his albums were, when all of his singles were repressed in slightly different covers. I think in the early 80s, 1983, to shamelessly cash in on the success of the Let's Dance album. And this one has a sticker on it, which, by the way, I've never taken off. No, I've tried to take off and I've given up because it's stuck onto the sleeve there. So, and this cost me £1 whole. And it was easily worth it. But TVC15 is backed with We Are the Dead from the Diamond Dogs album, by the way. And many years later, the final single from the album, which this was released in 1981, I think, possibly even later than that, for the compilation album Changes to Bowie, is an edit of Wild is the Wind, backed with an edit of Golden Years. And no, actually, it's the full album version of Golden Years. But again, 7-inch singles, getting them in picture sleeves was pretty rare in those days. This copy has TLH written on the inside, but my copy of the Station to Station album, because people would take these records to parties, used to belong to Yvonne. There you go, Yvonne. You had fantastic taste. I applaud you, but it's mine now, and it's been mine for about 20 years. When I got heavily into Bowie, which was about 2002, 2003, what I realised is that you could buy all the Bowie LPs for about £4 because people had ditched all their vinyl collections. They'd got the Ryko discs in 1990, they got the EMI remasters in 1999, and so people weren't buying records anymore. So people were literally giving albums away. The basements at places like MVE in Notting Hill, and Greenwich and places like that were just absolutely, you could pick up entire discographies of Pink Floyd and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones for like £4 or £5 easily, and they're all in amazing condition, aside from the fact that Yvonne's written on this, and it's slightly yellowed with the fact that this version is now 46 years old. You couldn't really tell that this album has been loved and cared for and has barely seen any wear over the time. It's not box fresh because nothing's box fresh, but it was bizarre. That's how I got all my Bowie albums, by the way, is being in the right place in the right time. I'm just really lucky. Now there was there's a number of other releases from the period, so I suppose we're going to have to go through those. The first and most obvious one actually is in 2010. Station to Station got a box set reissue, the most expensive version of which was about £300. And this featured, depending on which version you had, a remix by Harry Maslin. It had an original transfer of the original master tape, the original analog master of Station to Station, and it also featured a 2 CD, 2 LP live album, live at the Nassau Coliseum 1976, which had been previously unreleased, although heavily bootlegged. Let's go into the 2010 version of Station to Station. I bought the relatively budget version clamshell box with the live album, which features a CD booklet here, which kind of has some explanatory text. I think it has a day-by-day diary of the recording. It has a couple of photos, and it has some photos from the Nassau Coliseum show, and a reprint of an article, I think, from the New York Times as well. It also features, by the way, Bowie fans, you will notice there, photographs which appear on the covers, I think, for the Little Wonder CD from 1997. I think it's a thing called Curlian Photographs, which is a type of visual imagery where they took some kind of thermal imaging, and I think those photographs were after Bowie took cocaine, and therefore looked very much like that. We also have here a signed copy, although it's not signed by David, it's himself. It is a reproduction of the autograph, featuring a copy of an advert for the Station to Station signed limited edition book by Jeff McCormack. Limited edition of 2000, published by Genesis. Almost definitely staggeringly expensive. No, I don't have one because I think they cost something like £600 or something ridiculous when they were published. We also have here the 2 CD Nassau Coliseum set, which is in a gatefold sleeve and features the CDs here and here. This live set, absolutely stonking. really recommend you getting it if you get a chance to get it. I think it's been released as a separate standalone CD now after the release of the Who Can I Be Now box set. We also have the Station to Station album in like a mini reproduction card sleeve with the inner, which again you saw on the LP itself. If you're a budget flyer, the 3 CD version of Station to Station from 2010 is well worth getting. It also features 3 or 4 kind of photographs from the era printed on thick cards. Really do. I rate this version of the album actually. It's very good. It's very well done. Very well packaged. There was also a reissue, the first official CD version, authorised by Bowie, aside from the RCAs, which was this is the Ryko disc version from 1990. Features the remastered version of the album, plus bonus tracks, live versions of Words on a Wing and Stay, recorded at the Nassau Coliseum. So if you have the 2010 version of the album here, you don't need the Ryko disc version if you're just chasing the exclusive material. Although obviously they are different masterings. Unlike all the Ryko disc versions of them, it's a 4-panel fold out which comes with a poster. I'm not sure why anybody would use that as a poster, to be honest, because what would you put on your CD there? That's not really that satisfactory. But there you have it. 2010 saw the deluxe edition here, and what I haven't mentioned here, and is more readily available now on the Who Can I Be Now box set, is the Harry Maslin remix from 2010 of the album. So a number of Bowie albums have been revisited in remixed, remastered forms. As I've mentioned before, I think Space Oddity, the Metropolist. What else has been remixed? So we've had that. We've also had the remix of Lodger, Never Let Me Down Again. There's all been available in alternate mixes and alternate versions, taking the original and well-known studio version of the album and revisiting it and representing it in a new mix. So the Harry Maslin mix of Station to Station 2010 is not, despite what you might think, a completely useless piece of exploitative and pointless remixing. It's a genuine kind of revisit and reinvention of the album. And this is the Who Can I Be Now box set version of the original mix, and the Harry Maslin mix is presented in the colour version of the sleeve, which was last seen on the Ryko disc version, and it features the same kind of approach. It just features a different mix of the album, and what's substantially different about the Harry Maslin mix, by the way, aside from the terribly compressed mastering, is that there is a different vocal on the track Wild is the Wind. There's a different vocal take on this version on the Harry Maslin mix, which was never really vastly well organised or advertised, but it is there. It's a previously unreleased David Bowie performance. On the Who Can I Be Now box set, you've also got the Live at the Nassau Coliseum release, which again has the same kind of approach and packaging as the previous version that you will have seen. So again, you don't need Who Can I Be Now, but if you absolutely positively have to have the Harry Maslin mix and you don't want to pay £300 for a super mega expensive box set, that is the version to go for. In 2017, the Nassau Coliseum album was pressed and released in its own right, released from the restrictions of the box set as a double vinyl LP. And I've got to tell you, this is beautiful. This really is. This Live at Nassau Coliseum deserves to stand up with any other Bowie album as any other Bowie live album as a fantastic and definitive live document of Bowie at his best. Live Bowie was fantastic at this point. If you're the bass player in Therapy, well, fan-fucking-tastic, as he says in between every song. There you are, and this is just a great live album, which really should have come out at the time. But as I've kind of said before, you didn't release live albums with every tour in the 70s. You didn't make live films of every tour. They were special events. They were expensive and they were difficult and there was no video sell-through market, so live albums were more popular than live films. Live films were almost an ego trip to go, look, I'm so good, I'm prepared to have my show filmed and to get you to pay and go and see it in the cinema, and maybe if you're unlucky to see it on television, or maybe even VHS, although VHS was still 5 years away at this point. But no, live at Nassau Coliseum, one of the best Bowie live albums. And on this tour, although not on this album, um, the Iggy Pop track, I think, was it Sister Midnight, I think, was performed live on this tour, which had not actually been released in a studio form by David Bowie. But David had written Sister Midnight. Now, I could be totally wrong there, and if I am, forgive me completely. But I think he did perform it on this tour. There's also, by the way, a cover version of the Velvet Underground's Waiting for the Man on this album, which again was not that well known in a David Bowie form. So well worth picking this up if you get a chance to. A couple of other releases which kind of came out around about the same time, 1976. The first David Bowie hits album, Changes One Bowie, featuring a photograph of David very recently. Again, this copy belonged to Yvonne, by the way. Obviously, you can clearly bought it at exactly the same time. Again, it's an orange label, original from the period. This one plays very, very smoothly indeed. And this has a slightly different price code. So the albums had price codes there next to them. Kind of like if you remember greeting cards, you used to have price codes and then you have to look at the price code. This was a HH. And this version of Station to Station has the price code ZZ. I don't know what the difference is between the two. Quite honestly, they are different prices. Maybe they want you to pay a little bit more for a greatest hits album. This presents in a chronological form David Bowie's greatest hits, according to the sticker on here, including Space Oddity, The Gene Genie, the first album appearance of John, I'm Only Dancing, and obviously kind of Fame, Young Americans, and Golden Years itself there, right down at the bottom. I haven't got a CD copy of this. Never felt the need to, because I've got Changes Bowie from 1990, which is almost exactly the same, actually. But again, I'd like to thank Yvonne for her great taste, and also her great taste in realising that you need to get rid of your records so that Mark can have them 40 years later. To match up with the Station to Station album remaster and remix in 2010 came this, the KCRW remixes of Golden Years, remixed by various DJs who worked for the station KCRW in America. And some of these remixes are very good, by the way. There's also a couple of excellent unofficial remixes of Golden Years, which are out there floating on the big bad internet, where someone's kind of taken the multi-tracks and reassembled the song so that it sounds completely different. I haven't even talked about side 2, which has TVC 15 on, which is, in my opinion, one of the best Bowie songs that there is. And then it's got Stay. Stay is a classic. I think maybe there's a law that says every band in the world has to release a song called Stay. Shakespeare's Sister did it, Power of Dreams did it, U2 did it, Dave Gahan did it, David Bowie did it. You know, The Mission did one called Stay With Me, Bernard Butler did a song called Stay. Lots of people have songs called Stay. In fact, if you want to be really perverse, you could do a thing called the Stay EP, where you do cover versions of 6 or 7 songs, all called Stay, and you do them in different styles. If I was in a band, I almost definitely would have done that by now. Maybe I'd have written my own song called Stay, and all the B-sides would have been songs called Stay written by other people. Who knows? I know that Therapy did it with the Gimme 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 Back My Brain single. All the B-sides were had the word gimme in it. So, you know, a cover of ABBA's Gimme Gimme Gimme, Ramones, I think it's Gimme Shock Treatment, and another track called Gimme NyQuil, All Night Long. Clever chaps. But there you are. Stay, track 5, absolute classic, played live right through to the end. You hear it and you go, oh my god. And I love the way that Earl Slick has this wonderful approach to kind of the riffs on Stay, that they sound muscular but tender at the same time. It's very specific skill. And then the very last track on the album is a cover version of Nina Simone's Wild is the Wind. The first song, by the way, that I saw about Bowie sing live at Glastonbury in 2000. And Wild is the Wind is based upon the cover version by Nina Simone and not the other versions that were written by other people, by the way. And apparently, Frank Sinatra was recording in the same studio at the same time and kind of popped in to listen to David Bowie's work and complimented upon how he sang the song and the mix that he heard during the recording sessions, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. Although, of course, sometimes you see pictures of celebrities together and you go, there's no way that those two would ever have met. And then, as somebody once pointed out, is that all those bands get kept meeting at airports anyway because they're all flying to the same place. They're either leaving or just arriving, or in hotel lobbies and things like that. It's the idea that there was a rivalry between bands, apart from between Morrissey and Robert Smith, is generally pretty low. And then you think about the idea that, well, Gary Newman is older than Gary Oldman, and then your head kind of explodes. And I think there's only about 14 days between the two of them. Life's strange, man. It really is. And I'm living it. I don't even understand that. But there you go. So anyway, I'm rambling. Station to Station is one of my very, very favourite David Bowie albums. It's absolutely brilliant. There is nothing about the album that I would change. Not the cover, not a hair on its head, not an ounce of it anywhere. And it's a wonderful, lean, experimental album full of classic songs. It influenced Kraftwerk. It was influenced by Kraftwerk. It's got some of the best songs that David Bowie ever wrote. At one point, it was my favourite of his. And I think today, now, it's in my top three. My other two will surprise and shock you. I haven't got to any of them yet, but certainly at the time Station to Station came out, had I been experiencing this in real time, I'd be like, this is his best album yet. And I'd be absolutely right to say so. Right, I'm going to wrap up here. Thank you, if you've made it this far, to listening to me talk for 42 minutes about a David Bowie album from 46 years ago. I really appreciate you sticking about. If you've got any comments or thoughts or any suggestions, apart from do less things, I've thought of that one, do let me know. And stay in touch. I will see you all soon. Stay beautiful. Bye, gang. Stay lovely.